our moderator, Charlie Manzano. Charlie is a junior at the Master's School, where he is passionate about social justice and science. He is also on the Youth Advisory Committee for the Cinematters New York Social Justice Film Festival. Charlie, over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl. I'm so honored to introduce our panelists. Christi Cooper is the director of Youth V Gov. She's also a PhD scientist, a documentary filmmaker, and an Emmy Award-winning cinematographer. Vic Barrett is one of the plaintiffs in the Juliana versus United States lawsuit. He was raised in the great state of New York as a first-generation Honduran American. He appreciates the uniqueness of his heritage of being Afro-Indigenous and Afro-Latino, which inspires his connection to the natural world and the ways we can challenge ourselves to understand it better. Kelly Matheson is the Associate Director of Programs at Witness, a human rights attorney and an award-winning filmmaker who leads Witness's video as evidence program. You can learn more about any of them on the Cinematters website. First of all, I just want to say this is one of my favorite films that I reviewed for the film festival. I'm also absolutely amazed by all of your work. So I was wondering, Christi, how did you get the idea for the film?
Charlie, thanks so much for the warm introduction, and thanks to the festival and Cinematters for having us. Yeah, my introduction to the film, actually, it's nice to have Kelly on this panel today, because my introduction to this film goes quite a ways back, 11 years back, to 2011, where I joined Witness, where Kelly works, to direct and produce 10 short films about young people who were suing their state governments over climate change. And that was kind of the introduction to me to, first of all, working with youth on camera and telling their stories, working together with them to shape those stories, and also the world of climate litigation and using the judicial system as a way to address the climate justice issue. And some of those plaintiffs that I worked with back then are now plaintiffs in this federal case, the Juliana case, and are featured in Youth V Gov. So in 2016, actually, another kind of moment, a pivotal moment for me, Kelly was actually visiting in Bozeman, Montana, and we were on a hike, and we got word that Judge Coppin had ruled in favor of the youth plaintiffs in this case. And that was kind of the turning moment for me, where I decided that I needed to drop everything else that I was doing and follow this story and really follow it out all the way to the end, even though it's still ongoing. So it's been quite a long journey.
Mm-hmm. Vic, how did you get involved originally in the Juliana versus United States case?
Yeah, I was doing a lot of climate advocacy at home. I kind of just, a nonprofit called Global Kids walked into my freshman year global history class and offered that they were doing human rights after school programs. So I decided to join that. And then through that programming, through meeting friends in it and learning more, I realized the intersections between climate and social justice, and realized the intersections between, you know, how me as a Black, Indigenous, Latino person, and people like me are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. So through that work, I did a lot of like trying to talk to city councilors and legislators who oftentimes kind of had a very easy way of dismissing young people showing up in their offices because they knew that we couldn't vote for them in their next election or for their next term. So I felt like I was getting a lot of like pats on the head and then a quick selfie for them to post, and then getting kind of pushed out. And the lawsuit and being introduced to the lawsuit was this opportunity, instead of like trying to go through the legislative branch and convince these people that at the time I couldn't vote for, that they need to care about my future, putting the actual cold, hard facts of the climate crisis in front of the judicial branch and in front of judges who actually, you know, have a responsibility to respond to truth and fact. So that's kind of the process in which I decided that I wanted to get involved in the lawsuit.
Mm-hmm. Kelly, can you tell us a little about your organization, Witness?
Sure. Witness is an international human rights organization, and we use video to try and change human rights practice, policy, and law for the better so that we can protect human rights. And climate change obviously is an umbrella issue when it comes to human rights, because we have basic rights, right? The right to life, the right to health, the right to clean water, the right to food, the right to participate in government, the right to access to justice. And climate change is that one umbrella issue that not only exacerbates all of the human rights problems this world faces, such as war, poverty, migration, disease, and more, it actually prevents solutions to these entrenched human rights issues. So while Witness doesn't work exclusively on climate change, we work on international crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. We work on land defense with indigenous groups throughout the Americas and Africa, and we work on state violence. Climate change is the one issue that affects every single community that we work with that is facing these very, very difficult situations.
Mm-hmm. Why do we need lawsuits like the Juliana versus United States case? What is their significance?
Kelly, do you want to talk first about why we can't use human rights violations in the US?
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of background. Often people are asked, well, why can't we bring this in an international forum? Climate change is an international issue. It affects the globe. Well, the very simple answer is that the right to a healthy environment doesn't exist in international human rights law. And to give a brief summary of that one-liner, that one key sentence, back in 1948, in the aftermath of World War II and the Holocaust, the global community came together and developed what was called the modern era of international human rights. And they created what is called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the UDHR. Now, the US signed on to this, but the UDHR is what we call soft law. It's beautiful, it's got great language, it states all of our fundamental rights, but it's not enforceable in courts. So then what happened is the international community came together and they created these different treaties, like the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights you may have heard of, or the Covenant on the Rights of a Child. But there's two problems there. One, the US, out of the 7 major international treaties, has only signed 3. It's very difficult, even if they've signed it, and it gets woven into law to enforce it. And as mentioned, the right to a healthy environment isn't in any of these 7 major treaties. So young people can't pursue, actually none of us can pursue, the right to a climate system that is able to sustain humanity in an international forum. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but I'll stop there. There are some regional bodies where you can bring these cases, but we might explore that later. But right now, you have to go to the national courts.
And I'll kind of launch off of that in terms of like some more specifics to the Juliana case. And Vic can speak to this as well. These young people filed this lawsuit originally against President Obama in 2015. And it is a constitutional climate change lawsuit. So they are claiming that the US government has violated their constitutional rights to life, liberty, property, and personal security. And because they are young people, they do not have the same rights in our democratic process that fully votable legal status are able to. So part of the reason that it's young people in this lawsuit is because they do not have that same political power that adults do. And they are also disproportionately impacted by climate change now and will be in the future, as well as future generations who have not even been born yet. And I saw a brief question in the chat window that I can kind of answer along with this, but the lawsuit is, it's a federal case. It was filed initially in the District of Oregon. It has gone up to the Ninth Circuit Court, up to the Supreme Court, both of those courts several times, and is now currently back in the District Court. The plaintiffs filed this last spring, what's called a motion to amend their complaint. So they're asking for the courts to allow them to kind of mold their requests to the court that are more in line with how the Ninth Circuit Court decided. That with a focus being on declaratory relief, for the courts to simply state that they have a constitutional right and that this right is being violated. And so we've been waiting since, when was the hearing, Vic? In June? I think it was in June.
Yeah.
So we've been waiting for quite a while now for this decision from Judge Aiken, and we're really hoping that she rules in their favor and will send the case back on track to go to trial.
Mm-hmm. So what is speaking of disproportionately affected communities, what is the significance of addressing climate change through a lens that highlights youth, Black and Brown, low income, and other marginalized communities?
So, sorry, Charlie, could you say that one more time just so I could give you the best answer?
Yeah. Sort of, why do we need to address climate change through a lens that specifically highlights Black, Brown, low income, and other marginalized communities, as well as youth?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with just addressing, like you said, who's disproportionately impacted. And I think it goes past the discussion of even climate change and the climate crisis. It's just about investigating who has the most privilege and power in our society and how that implicates the people who have the least. So even when we're not talking about climate change, for example, we could see the ways that COVID disproportionately impacted Black and Brown people. We could see the ways that poverty, lack of housing, all of these intersectional issues disproportionately impact Black and Brown people. And I think when we look at climate change, something that seems really big and, sorry, I'm trying to think of this word, but it's not coming. But something that seems so massive and outside of everybody, when we could humanize the issue by looking at the people that on the day-to-day are impacted disproportionately, that kind of brings more people into the discussion and brings more people into the conversation. I think climate change is a really good baseline in which to look at how capitalism and the patriarchy and white supremacy and all these things influence a system that keeps certain people at the bottom. And if you could understand that, and if you could care about that, there's so many social issues and so many global issues that you can act on as well. And I think that's why it's important that we center those voices, especially because Black and Brown and Indigenous people have for centuries known how to live with nature and known how to live with the earth and take care of it and, take what they need, but leave what they don't. And the society we have now doesn't reflect that. So if we can borrow those practices and learn those practices and center that way of living and that philosophy to engage with the earth, then, we could be in a much better position than we are.
Thank you for that. So Christi, what were you hoping the film would accomplish? What message were you hoping it would send? What impact were you hoping it would make, if that makes sense?
Yeah, there's a lot of answers to that question. I think, well, more broadly, along with the film release, with our festival run and with our upcoming commercial release, we have a very strong impact campaign that we're running in conjunction with this film, where we're working with communities across the country to support and engage young people on holding their governments accountable when it comes to the climate crisis. And when we say governments, we're not just speaking about the federal government, but also state and local governments, city commissions, school boards, etc. And more specifically, to the film and the film's messages, one overarching goal that I really wanted to accomplish was for more people to know about this case, because this case is so pivotal and important in how our country is addressing the climate crisis and the potential that the judicial system has to solve this problem. And I think this is the first case of its kind. It's the first constitutional climate change lawsuit. These young people are so incredibly extraordinary and are really so brilliant at bringing this story to light, and as Vic said, bringing the humanness to the issue. I think, as you see in the film, the personal stories of these youths are really the heart of the story, and they make that connection to what the case is proving is this individual harm to each of these young people. So that was definitely, one of my big goals, was just to increase awareness about this case and to spark interest and support in further supporting these young people, and for more people to take action to hold our government accountable. I think another really important message that I hope that people have gotten from this film is the connection between our environmental rights and our constitutional rights, and how inherently ingrained they are in what it means to have a safe and livable environment and planet, and that is so inherently woven into our rights to life and to liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and to have a viable future. And I think another piece that we've often heard in screenings that I think people weren't always aware of is this long historical piece to the story, of going back 60 years, what these plaintiffs have as evidence in their cases, this story going back 60 years to show what the government has known, the actions that it took to get us into this problem, and really how ingrained this is in our overall system, and how our economic system is completely based on a fossil fuel based energy system. And these are those larger levers in our system that need to change in order for us to actually address the issue. So those are kind of some of the hallmarks that I'm really hoping that people take away from watching this film.
Mm-hmm. Oh wait, was someone else going to speak? No? Okay. Kelly, how was your organization involved with the making of the film?
We actually weren't involved with Youth V Gov. We were involved with the 10 short films that we created prior to Youth V Gov. Those 10 short films can actually be found on the website of Our Children's Trust. And the title of the series is called Stories of Trust, Calling for Climate Recovery. And it featured 9 of the youth plaintiffs. And they're just 6 to 8 minute stories about why they're bringing these cases. And we wanted their voices to be heard. We wanted to give them agency, and this was such a novel lawsuit because it was based on constitutional rights, and it was based on the public trust doctrine, which hopefully we'll get to. But we wanted to start educating the public about what is the public trust doctrine, and why do young people have a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment, and why are young people disproportionately affected by this. The target audience at the time was President Obama. So we didn't have to teach him about constitutional law. He was a professor in constitutional law. We also didn't have to teach him about the science because he had scientists in the Oval Office every week telling him that this was catastrophic. So these films are truly the plaintiffs telling their own story about why they are fighting for these constitutional rights. And it's a really powerful series. I really think so.
Yeah. Vic, what's it like to see yourself on screen in a documentary?
Weird for sure. Definitely weird. I appreciate, like, Christi especially, like I can't even express the appreciation I have to be able to, I don't know, be able to look at a movie and a film and reflect on how insane of an experience it's been to be a plaintiff. Because it's a bit existential and weird and large, you know, traveling all the time in high school and being around other young people in Airbnbs in different parts of the country, or you know, taking a red eye from Oregon to New York and going to school with my suitcase. Those are all weird things to reflect on, but I really
Or
appreciate,
sitting in courtrooms.
yeah, sitting in courtrooms next to people that I really love and care about and are my best friends, and who I, you know, nobody else I know could have the experience of suing the US federal government. And I'm glad that I have the other 20 plaintiffs to kind of be there and for me to care about and relate to. So yeah, it's definitely bizarre and weird sometimes, and like hard to know how to process or react to. But I think the largest feeling I have about it really is appreciation, because I don't know if I would be able to process this whole experience and reflect on it as well if Christi hadn't documented it so perfectly. And like, you know, like, this is something I've been doing since I was 16, and now I'm 22. And I think that, yeah, I'm just really grateful that I have that kind of window to process the whole experience through, because if I didn't, like, that would really suck. It would be really hard to kind of try to understand and look back and reflect and you know, really re-feel all the feelings that have gone into this experience. So shout out to Christi.
Can I add a little shout out to Vic though too, because before Christi was involved with the documentary, so between the documentary and the short films, Vic and I and Alex Losnek, one of the other plaintiffs in the case, were at a UN event, and Vic and Alex were advocating for there to be a documentary film on this. So they had the insight, right, to make to know that this story needed to get out. So Vic, credit to you and Alex for making that happen as well.
I never heard
I
that.
don't even know if you remember that. Yeah, I don't even know if Vic remembers that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think back. I do like vaguely remember what you're talking about for sure. I think that was the first time I ever met Alex, actually,
Yeah.
which was pretty dope. And kind of also piggybacking off what Kelly said, I think just like I've talked about this with Christi a lot, like storytelling is one of the most important parts of a movement. People being able to look at something and relate to it and learn from it, and you know, see reflections of themselves in it. I'm a huge advocate for the fact that like being able to tell a story is like the most important part of being able to really uplift a movement and make a difference, because it's kind of it's more, you know, I could send a bunch of emails and be like, donate $5 to our campaign, but I think people are more touched by getting to see who somebody actually is. I think that's really what's uplifted in the last few years, more Black and Brown and Indigenous voices, like legitimate documentation of that experience and how people feel looking at, or young people especially, looking at a world that's impacted by climate change.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You all are really so very supportive of one another.
Doesn't work without it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We covered this a little bit before. I wanted to explore it a little bit more in depth. What has happened with the case since the film was made?
Yeah, I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, that the plaintiffs have filed their motion to amend their complaint, and they had confidential. Vic actually can't speak about it. I can't speak about it because it was confidential. But they had confidential settlement negotiations with the administration that Judge Aiken ordered starting in May, and from what I understand, Vic, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that those have kind of petered out because it it didn't really amount too much. So I don't think that those settlement discussions are continuing. Is that correct?
Yeah, so something that since I spoke with Julia, who's the lead lawyer on the case that we can talk about, is the plaintiffs as a collective have decided to cancel settlement conversations just because of the lack of participation on behalf of the Biden administration or willingness to actually make them effective or go somewhere. So kind of a repeat of what I was saying before, that feeling of, the people that we elected aren't going to listen. So we might as well just return to the courts to actually put what we can in front of them, because our case is very strong. And if they don't want to work with us, then, we'll keep doing what we've been doing, which is suing them.
I wanted to say one of the, I think something that a lot of people don't understand after watching the film is that this case, all of the moments that you saw in the courtrooms were procedural moments. They were procedural motions that were filed in the case. They were never actually the trial. These young people have never been able to present their evidence before the courts. They've never been able to testify. This has all been shenanigans and hindrances and motions filed by the government and originally by the fossil fuel industry as well to slow this whole thing down. So a huge goal right now, which is part of the reason that they have amended their complaint, is to really put this focus on getting to trial. Because if you can imagine having a 12-week long trial where these plaintiffs are able to present all of their evidence and to work with their 20 experts that they have who are providing evidence on this case, from the psychiatric trauma to young people, from the economic benefits to addressing and mitigating climate change, to the historical evidence. I mean, it would really be a huge moment in the climate world if this case could get to trial.
Yeah, and I'll sorry, just to bounce off that again. Yeah, our case looks at evidence going back so many administrations, going back to the 1960s, that presidents have systematically ignored all of the information that they had about climate change. And I think it's interesting too that we bought this case under the Obama administration, and then it went to the Trump administration, and now we're in the Biden administration. But the facts still are the facts. And something that I definitely can say with confidence and is the Biden administration has unfortunately been falling into the patterns of their predecessors, patterns that have perpetuated the climate crisis for, what is it now, go back to the 1960s, like 60 years, 70 years. So we need to be like, we need to acknowledge that and understand that, business as usual is not effective or sufficient for posterity at all.
Mm-hmm. What advocacy work are you all doing today on climate change?
You want to start?
I'll start. Yeah, I mean, currently I work for a nonprofit organization called the Power Shift Network, which is a network of about 110 youth-led or youth-focused organizations that work on climate change, but also multi-issue organizations, where we kind of just support them in being able to tap into the larger movement and making sure that we're all staying cohesive in what we want and helping each other out and being the community that we need to be in a time where it's actually really hard to be in community. So kind of just trying to keep facilitating connections between organizations, how people can help each other out. If you're trying to start a water campaign where you live, well, we have these people working on a water campaign in Newark, or, how can we connect people and make sure people are working together? Also working on pipeline resistance in the Midwest. I spent a good amount of time up at Line 3, trying to make sure that that wouldn't go through. So right now it's unfortunate the way that that's gone, just with bureaucracy and politics, but also working on Line 5 in Wisconsin, which is a pipeline that's between, that's in the Great Lakes, and that poses a massive risk to water security, being able to clean it up if anything ever happened. It was supposed to shut down over a decade ago, and it's still running. And it's a massive problem that I'm working on also right now. So that's what I'm up to.
A lot of massive problems.
Yeah, so many massive problems.
I noticed something actually in the chat about the US not participating in the International Criminal Court at The Hague. So I wanted to say two things. This is different than what Vic and Christi are working on, but we were working with a group called Trial International because a war criminal named Chance decided to go into the national park in the Democratic Republic of Congo, cut down trees, sold those trees, bought weapons, and then terrorized the communities around the park and basically extorted them for all sorts of money, committed all sorts of horrible crimes. So we worked with Trial International to pull together the satellite imagery to show the deforestation, and we ended up getting a guilty verdict. The lawyer, not we, meaning that the prosecutors in the Democratic Republic of Congo did. And so Chance is off to jail. And that's working on the backside. That's working on criminal instead of constitutional or civil, which would ideally full circle back around to stopping people from taking criminal actions in the first place. So we're hoping that has a little effect. And then my personal passion, I saw this in the chat too, is to work on the science. And one of the questions was about why aren't we using the science from the Paris Accords? Why is the Juliana case using different science? And a very non-legal way to explain it is the Paris Accords are from 2015. When I look at my budget, like my personal budget, I don't base my life on the situation in 2015. Maybe since 2015, I got a promotion or I got a raise, or maybe I lost my job because of COVID. Situations change in our lives between 2015 and 2022. And climate science is incredibly dynamic. The goalposts are always moving, and courts are supposed to use the best evidence. And Paris science is now 7 years old, and it's not the best available science. So it's as simple as that.
I would even say that 7 years ago, 2 degrees was not something that anybody wanted to aim towards. I mean, we're not even to 1.5 degrees yet, and look at the catastrophic impacts that we're facing today. And 2 degrees, by any scientist who's speaking today, would never agree that 2 degrees is a safe temperature to let our global temperatures rise to.
Yeah, that's really political science. Not sorry, Vic.
No problem. I'll really briefly add also. I went to the Paris conference when I was 16 or 17, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. But being on the ground there, no matter the decision we came to and how much we celebrated it, I know for a fact, and I was a part of the protests of Indigenous people and island people all over the fucking all over the globe. I'm so sorry. All over the globe, who were saying 2 degrees is not 2 degrees means the end of so many cultures and so on. So even back then in 2015, when it was happening, there was people standing outside of those meeting rooms saying that this does not work for me or my culture or the existence of my people. So there's a lot of big picture nuance and context to the whole thing.
It was a political compromise. And I guess I would say from my part, in terms of continued climate advocacy, I mean, this film is still, even though it's been done and out there for over a year now, it's still a huge part of my life. We have been running this impact campaign for this past year. We are just now starting our educational distribution to get this film into middle, high school, universities across the country, as well as law schools. Our impact campaign is, while we have the broad overreaching goals of getting it to as many people as possible and providing support to the plaintiffs, we're also working more specifically in several states that through our research we have determined that they're kind of tipping point states where we feel like Youth V Gov can play a role in where these states are going, Colorado being one of them, Montana and Pennsylvania. So we're working directly with organizations like 350 Colorado and the Sunrise Movement, who are bringing in the youth in those communities, and the youth are really spearheading a lot of these actions and screenings that will be combined with actions so that we really can move the needle at the local level, because we know that regardless of what happens at the federal level, we need this change to spring out from these grassroots movements. So that's a lot of what my focus still is, as well as also trying to develop some new projects.
Okay. And with that, Cheryl, I think we should move on to the audience questions.
Yes, absolutely. There's some really great questions in the chat. Unfortunately, we won't have time to go to all of them, but let's see how many we can do. And what we're going to do is, we're going to call on people whose questions that we want to ask and unmute you so that you can ask the question. So the first question, Vicki Abrams, can you unmute yourself? I think I just pushed the thing, so you should be able to.
Congratulations to all of you on a magnificent film and beautiful question and answers and comments on the film. Just terrific. So I would like to ask you if you can say why this was a case against the government rather than against the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, I love this question, and it's a really important piece to the puzzle. When I first started working with Julia years ago, Julia Olson, who's the lead attorney on this case, she talked about how important these constitutional cases were against the government, because it's no longer the whack-a-mole approach to, as important as it is to fight for the pipelines to be closed and to fight against these fossil fuel industries. Those are all, I'm not at all negating or minimizing all of that work that needs to take place, but from a legal perspective, it's really a whack-a-mole approach to be taking on every single pipeline and every single fossil fuel, industry action that they've taken. And at the end of the day, the ones who are allowing this to take place, who are subsidizing, permitting, providing the infrastructure for, et cetera, is our federal government. So while the fossil fuel industry is taking these actions and they are, engaged in atrocities around the world, at the end of the day, it's our governments who are allowing them to do it. It's our governments who are permitting them, who are subsidizing, who are supporting them, and who are putting their priorities above the priorities of our citizens and of our young people and our future generations. So that's the heart of this case and why the case is against the government and not against the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah, and I'll really quickly add, I feel like the film does a really awesome job of kind of showing how the government really facilitated, like wholeheartedly, the fossil fuel infrastructure. Like when I first watched the film, I'll never forget that clip of Obama sitting back in his chair looking really relaxed, and he's like, yeah, I had the I don't remember what it was, Chrissy, but he's like
the largest oil and gas producer in the world. Yeah, that was me.
Exactly. Seeing all these presidents engaging with fossil fuel infrastructure and kind of trying to encourage it, I think that is a really awesome part of the film that's super I don't know, that at least opened my eyes to just how willingly the US federal government just said, go crazy, do what you need to do, and how engaged they were together, like hand in hand in perpetuating that system. And governments are responsible to people. We can never guarantee that corporations are going to be responsible to people, but government, it wholeheartedly is supposed to be. So I think that's kind of the significance of looking at them first.
That really nails it, Vic, because the government is responsible to enforce the Constitution or constitutional rights, not corporations. Full stop.
Great answer. Thank you. I think we have time for one more, if everybody's okay with it. I want a totally different question. Rachel Landsberg, can you ask your question? Oh, I need to give you permission to unmute. Sorry, I forgot that part. I have so much power here.
No worries. Yeah, I have a question for you, Vic. First of all, I really loved the movie. I think we all did. And I was struck in the movie by what seemed to be really close supportive relationships between you and the other plaintiffs in the case. And I feel like sometimes we adults or we older folks in the world in general, but in the climate movement in particular, sometimes can lose sight of the importance of relationships. Maybe it's living under, capitalism. So I would just love any thoughts you have both about the relationships you built and any suggestions or advice you have to us older folks about the importance of relationships as we do this work in the climate movement.
Yeah, I love that question. I love talking about how much we all love each other. But yeah, no, I think relationships have been a really significant part of experiencing this case together. If we didn't get close to each other, it could be a really isolating feeling to go back to your community and be like, yeah, I was just gone because I was sitting in court because I'm suing the government. But you have this love between the other plaintiffs that's really important and strong. Shu Tescott, who's a plaintiff on the case, is one of my best friends in the world. Aji is one of my best friends in the world. I recently, Shu Tescott's a musician, and I recently went to Portland for his album release, and he surprised me with Aji being there too. And it was just like the best feeling ever. And it makes me think about when we were like 15, 16, 17, and just getting to know each other. Actually, the first time I met one of my co-plaintiffs, Shu Tescott, was at the Paris conference, and he was giving a panel, and we happened to walk out at the same time. And I was like, hey, I think you're like on this lawsuit that I'm also on. And he was like, oh, cool. And then we spent like the next week just hanging out in Paris. And I was 16, he was probably 14. And like, it's crazy thing how long we've been friends throughout this process and how close we've all gotten throughout this process. And especially in like an instance that could, like I said, could be really isolating, like not to speak for her, but to just uplift Jaden's story, which is in the movie. Like she lives in a place where fossil fuel infrastructure is important to their being. And she lost friends being a part of this lawsuit. She lost friends where she lived being a part of this lawsuit. But also I got to see her make the closest friends in Miko and other plaintiffs around her age that she still spends time with and hangs out with and is connected to. So I would say the relationships are really strong. And that's another shout out to Christi, like the documentation of us all just like cuddling up with each other all the time, or, making music or playing around with guitars, hang out with each other. Sorry, I spent a long time on that. But the one suggestion or advice that I would give to older folks trying to facilitate relationships in the movement, and I know it's hard right now with COVID, but I don't know if I would have gotten as involved as I did in the movement if I didn't go to after school programs and get to be in a space with people I really liked and get free pizza and a Metro card to go. I think that creating physical space or creating a environment for young people to just talk and hang out and get to know each other and also care about the issues is really important, because I know what's maintained my connection to the movement over the last 8 years has definitely been just the amount of friends I have. And I could go to a climate event in any part of the country or the world most of the time and see somebody that I already know and that I really care about, because it's a close-knit community, and I think facilitating that wherever you are is what grows the movement. So.
And I would just want to add to folks out there who want to know how they can help. I think supporting young people in ways that allows them to come together in safe places and provides that networking support and the financial support for them to do that, because they have the answers and they need a seat at the head of the table when it comes to the solutions. And it's really a great way that you can support this work and the movement is to help provide those spaces and opportunities for young people.
Okay, Cheryl, should we ask the final question now? Or okay, what can we, the audience, do to make an impact?
Well, you can go to I'm going to drop a link in the chat. We have a Take Action page where you can go to learn more about how to be engaged specifically in this case and to support these young people. And part of that work is supporting our Children's Trust and the legal work that they're doing. They not only are supporting these young people in the Juliana federal case, but there's also 5 active state cases right now around the country. So you can also see where you might be able to tap into that. And really, we would just encourage people, as you're thinking about how to be engaged in the climate justice movement, to really think about what it means to hold your government accountable. And there's so many different ways that you can do that, from voting to petitioning to speaking with your representatives to constantly talking about the climate crisis and connecting it to everything that you do. And yeah, we just would really encourage people to do that. Share this film. It's going to be, if you work with young people, ask those schools to bring this film into their school. We would love to get it as broadly through the educational system as we can, as well as into law schools and universities, et cetera. And Vic, I know you have specific ideas too about how people can be engaged.
Yeah, no, kind of in terms of big picture, I always say that being engaged is kind of understanding what you care about and what interests you, and then trying to figure out ways that can support the movement. So I feel like making music or doing art or reading books, those are all ways that we can uplift the movement. And then also in the context of supporting young people, I would say kind of just trying to, because I can almost guarantee in most communities, there's young people who are trying to build a movement or trying to build a club even at school, or trying to build some sort of uplifting of the climate movement and talking about it. So even just, see, I'm getting old, so I still use Facebook. I don't know if the kids use it anymore. But, even if you send an Instagram DM to somebody or Facebook Messenger DM, if you have any resources, if you're like, hey, I could get you pizza for one of your meetings, or I could send juice boxes and stuff, like all of those things are actually really important. Or even just being like, I have other young people that I could talk to support you, or what campaigns are you working on? Maybe I know someone who could influence that somehow. I think just being supportive in the sense of what connections and resources that you may have that young people who are trying to build something may not have is really important and awesome. And I promise any teenager trying to start some sort of club or program or chapter in their community would be really appreciative of anything to kind of uplift that and make it more solid. So don't be afraid to reach out.
Cheryl, could I add that there's questions in the chat that go to the really the devil in the details of the cases, and OCT probably about once a month has briefings on the cases that really do a deep dive for people who really want to understand the legal. They're really good conversations that tell you what the lawsuit's about. The one I just listened to recently was LaRose versus Her Majesty the Queen, which is about the Canadian case. A couple other people mentioned in the chat the international cases. So there's often updates on the international cases. And then from my perspective, it's been mentioned, but the voting and being involved with the voting rights legislation that's happening now is so absolutely essential, because we need to take individual actions. All of us need to create changes in our personal lives, but this is a massive problem. We need government to act, and we need people in government who will actually support these young people and promote their constitutional rights. So get out there, fight the voting rights challenges that are going in, and get involved with politics.
Thanks to all of you. These are some really great concrete ways to get involved, and this festival is all about that. So Christi, Kelly, Vic, and Charlie, thanks so much for being here for this panel. And I just want to make sure, Kelly, when you said OCT, that's Our Children's Trust, right?
Yes,
I was like
Trust.
Trying to decode in my head, and I just wanted to make sure. And in addition, we will be sending out a link to everyone after who signed up for this session with a link to a page on our website that has a lot of ways that you can get involved about this film, and the Our Children's Trust website is listed there. So If this is an issue that moves you, I hope that you can get involved. I also love the fact that we seem to be planning another screening in the chat as this is going on. So hopefully everybody can go see this film again at the Jacob Burns Film Center after when the pandemic allows us to. I just want to close us out by thanking everybody one more time and reminding you that the film and others will be streaming on demand all weekend, and that we also have a number of great programs. So please join us and invite your friends and your family. Our next program is at 4:30 this afternoon, a Q&A on the film Ricochet. And again, you can see the full list of all of the programs at cinematters.film. So thanks to everyone for a great program, and have a great weekend.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for
Thank
your
you,
time.
everyone.